March is celebrated as National Women's History Month in thousands of schools, communities, and workplaces across the nation, as well as on military bases throughout the world. This celebration, designated by joint resolutions of the House and Senate and proclamations by 6 American presidents, is an opportunity to honor and celebrate women's historic achievements. Each year, National Women's History Month employs a unifying theme and honors women across the country whose work and lives testify to that theme. For 2011, the theme is Our History is Our Strength. To date, we have recognized national honorees, but this year, local communities, organizations, and institutions are invited to honor women within their own communities or organizations. Our History is Our Strength pays tribute to the millions of women who helped create a better world for the times in which they lived, as well as for future generations. Knowing the challenges these women faced, grappled with, and overcame can be an enormous source of strength to all of us. During today's difficult times, Our History is Our Strength can serve as an important reminder to our nation that adversity can be overcome. To give context to the meaning of Our History is Our Strength, I want to highlight the crucial roles women have played and continue to play in several important movements throughout U.S. history. The labor movement, which began as early as 1765 when women formed the first Society of Working Women. The women's suffrage movement, which was launched in 1848 at the first Women's Rights Conference held at Seneca Falls, New York. The civil rights movement, in which women held a variety of roles, from leadership to organizers to participants. The women's rights movement, which was re-energized in the 20th century with what is called the Second Wave. And the environmental movement, in which women played a key role from the early 19th century, and which was officially launched on Earth Day, April 22, 1970. To better understand the fabric of our history, let's look at a few women who participated in these movements, but whose names you may not know. Frances Perkins, who served as U.S. Secretary of Labor, began her advocacy for the labor movement when she witnessed the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911. Perkins watched helplessly as young women jumped to their deaths or were burnt alive in the fire. In all, 146 women workers lost their lives that day. The cause of the fire was unsafe working conditions, and the cause of the deaths was the fact that the factory owners had locked the doors from the outside. Perkins later said that the moment was seared on her mind as well as her heart, a never-to-be-forgotten reminder of why she had to spend the rest of her life fighting conditions that could permit such a tragedy. Perkins worked for safety legislation for industrial workers in New York State. She served as the first female member of the New York State Industrial Commission in 1918. She became chair of the commission in 1926, and 3 years later was appointed the state's top industrial commissioner. Perkins kept making strides in the labor field. She was appointed U.S. Secretary of Labor in 1933, a position she held for 12 years. She was the first woman to hold a cabinet-level position in the U.S. government. As Secretary of Labor, Perkins worked hard to secure legislation to enact unemployment relief, public works, Social Security, minimum wage, maximum hours, and the prohibition of child labor. Alice Paul, who represented the last generation of suffrage leaders, brought fearlessness and tenacity to the battle to secure women's right to vote. She planned a huge parade in Washington, D.C. in 1913 that upstaged the inauguration of the president at the time. She organized the first pickets at the White House in 1916 and 1917. Along with dozens of women, Paul was arrested and sent to jail. She went on a hunger strike and was met with force feedings in an attempt to have her declared insane. Publicity about the terrible prison conditions caused the public to demand that she and the suffragists be released. Paul's tactics helped pave the way for passage of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which secured the right to vote for women. Paul turned her attention to the Equal Rights Amendment, which she drafted in 1923. For over 50 years, until her death in 1977, she led the movement to have the ERA become a part of the Constitution. Minnie Jean Brown Trickey was only 16 years old when she became one of the Little Rock Nine who integrated Central High School in 1957. Along with 8 other African American teenagers, she defied death threats, hostile white demonstrators, and even the Arkansas National Guard to attend the all-white high school. Rising above the adversity, Brown Trickey took a courageous step that not only changed her life and education, but the lives and education of all students throughout the country. Today she is a social activist, guest lecturer, and the recipient of numerous awards, including the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor bestowed by the government. Bella Abzug, one of the most recognized and bold leaders of the 20th century's women's movement, declared, "This woman's place is in the House of Representatives." She was elected to the U.S. Congress at the age of 50 and served from 1970 to 1976. Abzug organized and presided over the first government-sponsored National Women's Conference at Houston in 1977. With great vigor and joy, Abzug took part in the last leg of the relay, which had carried a torch from Seneca Falls, where the first Women's Rights Convention had been held, into the stadium at Houston. Abzug co-founded several advocacy organizations, including the Women's Environment and Development Organization. Until her death in 1998, she helped WeDo work with the UN to create an International Women's Caucus. Rachel Carson is known as the founder of the contemporary environmental movement. She is recognized as a nature writer, marine biologist, and ecologist. Her intense love and connection to nature gave her the strength she needed to become one of the greatest advocates for the environment. In 1962, Carson published Silent Spring, which documented the dangers of air pollutants and pesticides on animals, people, and land. Her research noted how the unregulated use of synthetic pesticides was increasing cancers and genetic mutations. Her writing boldly challenged the practices of agricultural scientists and even the government. Carson called for a change in the way humankind viewed the natural world. Unrelenting until the very end of her life, she testified before President Kennedy's Science Advisory Committee in 1963, which resulted in the committee's groundbreaking report. In 1970, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, was established to regulate chemicals and protect human health by safeguarding the natural environment, that is, air, water, and land. Throughout our nation's history, women from all of America's cultural backgrounds have been in the vanguard of change. Sometimes they paved the way as pioneers, other times they built on the knowledge and work of those who had come before them. Women of all cultural, religious, political, economic, and geographic backgrounds have created the fabric of American society and have been an important part of our country's history. Learning about the extraordinary achievements of women helps diminish the tendency of some modern-day pundits to dismiss and trivialize who women are and what they have accomplished. In celebrating women's historic achievements, we present an authentic view of history. The knowledge of women's history provides a more expansive vision of what a woman can do. This perspective encourages girls and women to think larger and bolder, and gives boys and men a fuller understanding of the female experience. Knowing women's history challenges social assumptions and stereotypes about who women are and what women can accomplish. When we fail to learn about women's accomplishments, we take away incentives and dreams. Knowing the past instills pride and respect. It provides homage and inspires greater effort in different ways of living our lives. The stories of these women's lives inspires us with knowledge that adversity can be overcome and a purposeful life can be the outcome. Their stories are filled with pain and with joy, with challenges and opportunities. These are stories of great tenacity, courage, and ongoing hope. Knowing these stories expands our own sense of self and our knowledge of each other. I want to share with you the stories of two women who have recently passed away. Their life work embodies many of the social, political, and economic movements of our history. Their legacy serves as both a source of strength and a call to action. Dr. Dorothy Height served as the president of the National Council of Negro Women for almost 50 years. Her leadership helped countless women in America and around the world participate in democratic reform, which resulted in new opportunities for themselves, their families, and their communities. Dr. Height was born prior to World War I in 1912 in Richmond, Virginia. She was educated in the public schools in Rankin, Pennsylvania. At a very early age, she established herself as a dedicated student with exceptional oratorical skills. What is remarkable about Dr. Height is that as a young girl, she fearlessly expressed herself and did not internalize or retreat from the racist and sexist assumptions or actions of the time. It's not surprising that even as a young woman of 25, she heeded the call of Mary McLeod Bethune, founder of the National Council of Negro Women, to join in the quest for women's full and equal employment and educational opportunities. By that time, Dr. Height's career as a civil rights advocate had begun to unfold as she worked to prevent lynchings, desegregate the armed forces, reform the criminal justice system, and create free access to public accommodations. That same year, Dr. Height began her work with the National Young Women's Christian Association, the YWCA of the USA. She rose quickly through the ranks and held several leadership positions. Assuming responsibility for developing leadership training activities for volunteers and staff, she also developed programs to promote interracial education. Dr. Height is credited with developing the strategies to ensure the success of the YWCA's mission to provide equal opportunity and facilities for women of all cultures and nationalities. She was one of the major leaders of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Like today, these were fear-filled, challenging times. To create a dialogue about the civil rights movement, she organized Wednesdays in Mississippi, bringing together Southern and Northern white and black women. Her belief in honoring the diversity of America is seen in her promotion of interfaith and interracial movements. Dr. Haidt worked on several projects with Congresswoman Patsy Mink, who served in the House of Representatives for 12 terms. Congresswoman Mink championed the breakthrough legislation that allowed girls and women to participate in sports beyond anything imagined in previous generations. Mink is the first woman of Asian descent to serve in the U.S. Congress. Her ancestry is a classic story of immigrants seeking better life in America for themselves and their families. Her four grandparents immigrated from Japan in the late 1800s to work as contract laborers on Maui's sugar plantations. Mink was born in Maui in December of 1928. From her earliest years, she was encouraged to excel in academic courses. When she ran for student body president during her junior year in high school, she began her unofficial political career. World War II had begun, and she was facing the anti-Japanese American sentiment that prevailed throughout the country. Mink also had to overcome the obstacle of being the first girl to run for this office. To achieve this goal, she impressed a variety of students, including gaining the support of the popular football team. She won a very close selection and learned the importance of coalition building. In 1944, she graduated as her high school class valedictorian. The University of Hawaii is where Mink started college, but she transferred to the University of Nebraska, where she faced a policy of segregated student housing. Working with other students, their parents, and even university trustees, she helped end this policy of discrimination. Mink returned to the University of Hawaii to prepare for medical school and graduated with a degree in zoology and chemistry in 1948. However, at that time, none of the 20 medical schools to which she applied would accept women. Mink decided to study law and was accepted by the University of Chicago because they considered her a foreign student. Deciding not to inform the university that Hawaii was an American territory, she obtained her doctorate of jurisprudence in 1951. She became the first Asian American woman to practice law in Hawaii. In 1956, Patsy Mink was elected to the Territorial House of Representatives. It was the beginning of a long and effective political life for her. In 1959, Hawaii became the 50th state. In 1965, Mink was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives and began the first of 6 consecutive terms in the House. She was the first woman of color to be elected to Congress. Mink's ability to build coalitions for progressive legislation continued during her tenure in Congress. She introduced the first comprehensive Early Childhood Education Act and authored the Women's Educational Equity Act. In the early 1970s, she played a key role in the enactment of Title IX of the Higher Education Act amendments. Enacted in 1977, Title IX prohibits gender discrimination by federally funded institutions. It has become the major tool for women's fuller participation not only in sports, but in all aspects of education. Knowing the challenges these women faced, grappled with, and overcame can be an enormous source of strength to all of us. That is why the telling and recording of their stories is so important. These women demonstrated the courage to pave new paths, to push past what was considered safe or appropriate. In so doing, they created an expanded vision of what is possible for all of us to achieve. Their lives testify to the many ways in which individuals not only triumphed over adversity, but also how in living their lives they changed long-held stereotypes about women. Some women in history were honored at the time of their accomplishments, but their stories are often lost in the telling of history. For example, in 1926, 21-year-old Gertrude Adderley was celebrated with a dazzling New York City ticker tape parade. She had just broken the record for swimming the English Canal in 14 hours and 39 minutes. Adderley's time surpassed all previous records for men and women. Another woman recognized during the time she lived was Annie Oakley, one of the most exciting and accurate sharpshooters of all times. Starring in Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, she performed some tricks standing on a horse, a galloping horse. Using a .22 caliber rifle at 90 feet, Oakley could shoot a dime tossed in the air. It could split a playing card edge on and then put 5 or 6 holes in it before it touched the ground. In Europe, she performed for the royalty of Great Britain and Italy, as well as the President of France. The newly crowned German Kaiser, Wilhelm II, invited Oakley to knock the ashes off of his cigarette, which she did. There are countless other women whose accomplishments inspire and encourage us. Rear Admiral Grace Hopper was the quintessential computer geek. She is commonly referred to as the mother of the COBOL language, which she co-invented in 1959. Ellen Ochoa became the first Hispanic woman in space in 1993 on a 9-day mission aboard the shuttle Discovery. Ochoa is a scientist, inventor, astronaut, classical flutist, wife, and mother of 2 little boys. Clearly, these descriptors are not in order of importance, but all demonstrate her courage to succeed. Susan Butcher was the first woman to win the Iditarod dog sled race in 1986. She went on to win it 3 more times. Wilma Mankiller was the first woman elected principal chief of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. She served for 10 years, from 1985 to 1995. Her leadership brought about improvements in areas such as healthcare, education, employment, and literacy. On September 29, 1988, Stacey Allison's dream of standing on top of Mount Everest, the world's second highest peak, was realized as she became the first American woman to reach the summit. As a public speaker and writer, she encourages people to move beyond their limitations to achieve their dreams. In 1977, Janet Guthrie became the first woman to compete in the Indianapolis 500 and the Daytona 500 car races. Louise Arner Boyd, known as the Ice Woman, was an American who repeatedly explored and photographed the Arctic Ocean. In 1955, at the age of 68, she was the first woman to fly over the North Pole in a 16-hour flight. Bessie Coleman defined the word daring. She learned to fly in Europe because as a black woman, no flight school in America would accept her. She became the first African American woman to earn an aviator pilot's license. As a professional aviator, Coleman quickly gained a reputation as a skilled and daring pilot who would stop at nothing to complete a difficult stunt. She was often referred to as Queen Bess. Coleman, who died in a crash caused by mechanical failure, didn't live long enough to fulfill her greatest dream, which was to establish a school for young black aviators. But her pioneering achievements served as an inspiration for a generation of African American men and women. The stories of women's achievements are integral to the weaving of our historic tapestry. Learning about women's tenacity, courage, and creativity throughout the centuries is a tremendous source of strength. Knowing women's stories provides essential role models for everyone, and role models are genuinely needed to face the extraordinary changes and unrelenting challenges of the 21st century. Our female ancestors have wonderful stories to tell, legacies which extend far beyond sets of names and dates in the family tree. Discovering the substance of women's lives can be difficult, but not impossible. Technology and decades of dedicated research have made women's historic contributions visible in ways unimaginable 20 years ago. The resources and informed scholarship now available on thousands of websites are an incredible testimony to the significance of women's achievements. Through a combination of traditional genealogical research and social history research, you can fill in the gaps and tell the real story of your female ancestors, how they lived, what they wore, their hopes and dreams. There's magic in the telling of each of our ancestors' stories, a magic that is created by celebrating their vigor, purpose, commitment, intelligence, and talent. National Women's History Month celebrates the countless women who encourage a sense of possibility by their actions. Let us honor the women who help make the world better through their commitment to living life to the fullest. Let us seek out our women ancestors and tell their stories. This shared history will hopefully unite families, communities, and nations. Let's consider for ourselves and our children the importance of knowing our history. Let us celebrate the stories that demonstrate the tenacity and determination of women who, through their actions, remind us that indeed our history is our strength.